Good day to you, partner. I'm keen, and I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
Hey guys, Wheat Solo here, aka the Skeleton King. So this is a triple record because I just can't help myself and bring up the most important point of this video. Seriously. But we're going to do it again. And we're going to start with the most important point, although I would like to say other things first. Do I think this build in any way breaks the game? No. If anyone's wondering about the ability of Cyclone armor as like a too useful thing to have on Infinity for a class running around like a Necromancer, Cyclone armor is not... How do I put this? The reason I run this build is not because of Cyclone armor. The reason this build can function is because I do get Cyclone armor. And that is an important distinction to make. Cyclone armor is much less reliable than bone armor. And that's really weird to say because in general, like I've talked about how rare elemental damage is. And that is really important. So that's like one benefit of Cyclone armor. But the big reason why Cyclone armor is less reliable than bone armor to me is because Cyclone armor, when there is elemental damage on the screen, so like anytime I go into Ghoul Lords and they all attack me, surprisingly their firewall does a lot of damage. If any enemy is enchanted with it, so for instance any of the melee mobs as well, I believe Sand Raiders might have a fire elemental damage to their attack, it drops quite often in this map. And that is where I possibly could die. Luckily, I do run Nature's Peace, and I highly recommend that for this build. It is one more swap. Technically, you could just skip the skill ring or skip the Nature's Peace. But just having a little bit of regen, some extra life, and max reses because your Cyclone armor will drop, it just makes me feel a little safer. Compared to bone armor, yes, physical damage is so common, but usually you're scared of physical damage in a certain situation. When you're amplified. Since you don't need to be worried about amplified with this build because you take damage before it takes into account resistances, then all of a sudden that bone armor lasts a long time. With Cyclone armor, again, for better or for worse, you are taking damage before your resistances are taken into account. So in that regard, it just disappears quickly because you're almost always going to be having 75% reses, and if you are a little lower than that, you're going to be well above 50 in almost every single serious build in this game. Although every once in a while there is a build that maybe cuts res a little bit. It's pretty rare in PD2, but I've done it, and I'm sure somebody else has done it just based on necessity for that build. I don't get any life after each kill, okay? So would Dull Runes be an option? I kind of did need a little extra res with the way I've built this, and that's with the T3s armor. That does give me a chunk of faster run walk, but I don't think that's necessarily the best armor for this build. It does give me, though, the coolest look, especially with these blue boots. I think in general, a +1 Trangs or a faster run walk Trangs, a 3-socket Trangs, any of those would be very solid for this build. And if you did actually have a 3-socket or +1 Trangs with 2 sockets, then you could actually ignore the Ormus robes and have one less swap. If you're wondering how much damage you would lose, for T1 and T2 it wouldn't matter. Well, for this build it would matter a little bit, but basically you'd only notice it in T3. So I'm actually clearing this at a pretty decent clip, okay? And I'm not stomping on anything, I'm kind of letting the fire golems go off and do their own thing. And I do think this would function as well on a higher density map because I have run a slightly higher density marketplace. In fact, let's talk about the mods real quickly. There's no bad mods. There is 17% max health, so take that into account when you're looking at the fire golems taking a little longer than usual. And it is a T3 where mobs don't have those nerf healths. There is monsters deal splash damage, which I consider to be a pretty bad mod for a summoner. Now again, we generally build summoners to not need summons to take damage for us not to die, but just the fact that there's a chance that every time you stomp you'll be taking more damage than you expect makes it a pretty shitty mod for summoners. But the way I play this build, I don't really need to worry about monsters take splash damage. Why? If I'm going to get hit, I'm just going to get hit, okay? I'm just running around, all right? It's not like I'm stomping into a group. I'm just running at them, like face first. But that's how you should play this game. Like a softcore. Okay, I put on a helmet. I'm a little baby. I love that meme. So, I think the map mods are fine. I do wonder one thing about replenish life on a map mod, and I wonder if the replenish life that the enemies get is the same buffed version that we enjoy, which is basically replenish life divided by 2 every 25 frames, or 1 second. If it is, I think that actually is a pretty shitty mod for this build in particular on higher health maps, but that would be it, and I do think that would be interesting because I think without that replenished life, Sand Raiders and Unravelers would die a bit quicker when I'm just running around and the fire golems are all separated. Because that's 1,000 life a second. That's not nothing if I'm ticking, once per second with my fire golems. So now that we've got those big things out of the way, what is the future for this build and what do I want to see from it? I want to do a higher density Kazakhstan marketplace. I want to try Ancestral Trail because I've forgotten to do that one, but it's pretty wide open. And besides that, I've done all the wide open maps, except for Canyon of Secheron. But I've done Caldeum, which is big enough, Jungle, Royal Crypts feels good enough. It's a little tight, but it's actually more open than you think. I actually felt Bastion was a little too tight. Basically, Bastion, when I was rolling at all higher density, there'd be way too often where I couldn't run through the tighter corridors, while in Royal Crypts, I was able to avoid that. So I wonder if it's actually wider, or if it was just, psychosomatic or luck. Getting a Vigor Shrine with this build is Fuego, because you get some more... you get more velocity and faster run walk, and faster run walk is, Vigor... velocity is like faster run walk on steroids, basically. It's like fanaticism reducing base weapon speed. So I think I've covered pretty much anything. I feel super safe playing this build. I don't think it's broken, but do I think this is the best version? Let's just say that before I go into the last videos. Okay, so we have the Act 2 with Emilio. That is the best version if you need to kill map bosses. There's no argument. It's also really, really nice once I put Dolrus in it, and I felt... pretty safe, okay? I don't know about as safe as this build, but I think if I ever actually got attacked, my defense was pretty high at the end of that build, especially if I put on a steel carapace. Whew, man, I'd be chunky. Act 3 is probably the most versatile, and you can't take that away from him. Again, I'm not going to do it anymore. Those times are over, but you put a Shattered Wall on an Act 3 Merc, whew. But this build, you get to run fast in town, and LOD content. Skillet King out, guys. GG.